We all know this car. Maybe you had one in your youth, or maybe, more likely, your parents. It could even easily have been your grandparents, or their family, or friends' friends. The thing is that the Volkswagen Beetle is one of the most built cars ever, and it never changed its basic shape. It is so recognizable, so simple, and so incredibly straightforward that it has become absolutely synonymous with Volkswagen. But wait, I'm here for a video on supercars, you say. And so far, you're disappointed. Well, the thing is that the humble Beetle earned them money, basically building the foundation for the empire we now know as the Volkswagen Group. And without Volkswagen Group, there would be no Veyron nor Chiron. What if these two speed legends had become something completely different? You see, the idea was born in the mind of one of the most powerful figures in automotive industry, a man working for the Volkswagen Group. So buckle up, this is going to be the story of how the Veyron and the Chiron came to be. A story that's anything but straightforward. This video is brought to you by Selected Car Investment, where we buy and sell only the best collectible cars. Check our website to see if your next car happens to be in stock, or contact us for off-market cars, or if you want help to find your next investment. This YouTube video is obviously about the Veyron and the Chiron. And if it had not become a Bugatti, it would probably have become something else, as the man with the idea was one of the most powerful and influential persons in the modern car industry, Ferdinand Piëch. But we're jumping to conclusions here, since, as always, things are never quite as simple nor as easy as they sometimes appear with the benefit of hindsight. So, let's try to take this story from the beginning. Several things of what I just said needs to be specified further. When I mentioned the modern car industry, how modern are we talking? Well, the background of the Veyron is influenced by events as far back as the 60s, 70s and 80s. And the 90s Volkswagen Corrado played a crucial role, but more on that later. Most influential car persons, I stated. That's subjective, but consider this. Ferdinand Piëch masterminded Porsche's move from smaller capacity race cars with series produced or series related engine to the great 917 that won Le Mans overall twice, thereby taking Porsche upmarket, where they have stayed ever since, with wins at Le Mans a continuous part of the recipe. When Piëch moved to Audi in the 70s, he repeated this feat with the Audi Quattro in rallying and later took them to Le Mans as well, again elevating the mark upmarket. And then I said Piëch was the man with the idea. But what exactly was his idea? Well, he certainly had a lot, but here I'm specifically talking about the idea that turned out to become the Bugatti Veyron. And this might come as a surprise to some, but the idea was not about Bugatti as such. It was mostly about an engine. Ferdinand Piëch was a trained engineer, and a great one at that, and certainly knew about powerful engines. The engines in the early 917 race cars he oversaw developed more than 500 horsepower, and the turbocharged engines in the later rally spec Quattros delivered even more. But those were race cars, and Piëch wanted something much more difficult. A hugely powerful engine in a road car that could be driven on a day-to-day basis. Understanding his character, I would guess that Piëch had probably been dreaming about that for years. But in 1993, Piëch became chairman of the executive board at Volkswagen Group, thereby fronting an enormous car manufacturer, although not as enormous as today. In fact, in 1993, Volkswagen Group was not in a good way, and in the grand scheme of things, Piëch should probably be remembered as the father of one of the greatest turnarounds of any automotive company, acquiring Skoda, Bentley and Lamborghini along the way and forming a true conglomerate in less than 10 years after he took to the chair. To car guys like me, however, I'll remember Piëch not least for the way he did it, by, and some would say relentlessly, pursuing the limits of the absolutely technically possible. In fact, you might have heard of the Audi motto Vorsprung durch Technik, or in English, Vorsprung durch Technik. The motto was in use a few years before Piëch arrived at Audi, but those three words could in fact also describe the Piëch way of thinking, or indeed him as a person. He has been described as a person that firmly believed there was a technical solution to everything. I guess you could say Ferdinand Piëch was the prototype technocrat. And this technocrat wanted to build the greatest engine in the world. Which is where we get back to the Volkswagen Corrado. This little sports coupe for the people debuted in 1988 with a host of the usual platform sharing seen across the Volkswagen Group. But in 1991 it got a new engine option, the VR6. As the name implies, this new 6-cylinder engine was a mix between a V6 and a straight 6, but more compact than both, thereby fitting neatly in the front-wheel drive Corrado. To cut an already long story somewhat shorter, Piëch realized that the ideas in the VR6 could be elevated to become the basis for his greatest engine, basically by combining 3 VR6 engines, creating an 18-cylinder masterpiece of intricate complication, great balance, and of course, power. It was 1977 when Piëch presented his idea to the head of powertrain development in the classical form of a hand drawing on an old envelope. Brilliant stuff, right? To me, as a car guy, this little drawing is more interesting than anything written inside the pyramids, carved in Viking stones, or found encapsulated in amber. This is pure automotive archaeology. And wait, it gets even better. Because actually there was one small problem. There was no car to install that masterful engine in. Yes, really, at this time, no plans for a complete car were thought of. It was all about the engine and the engine only. It was obvious to everyone that this engine belonged in something really special. And again, thinking of Piëch's character, this unresolved situation was not to last. If that really special car did not exist, he was the man for creating it. Today we know that Piëch masterminded the acquisition of Bentley and Lamborghini the year after his drawing on the envelope, and that Volkswagen Group were also in contention for Rolls-Royce. Couldn't the masterful engine have ended up in any of those? Maybe, but it didn't. Instead, the solution was presented to Ferdinand Piëch by his youngest son during an Easter holiday in 1998 by pure coincidence. Another one of those great Bugatti legends has it that said son begged Piëch for a scale model of a Bugatti 57 SC Atlantic, and when the father obliged, it dawned upon him that Bugatti would be the perfect candidate to bear his engine. Piëch later called this moment an amusing stroke of fate, thereby proving a certain sense of humor as well, I think. Rather swiftly, Volkswagen Group acquired the rights to the Bugatti name from the remains of the ill-fated first rescuer of the marque, Romano Artioli. What then followed was a huge power demonstration by the Volkswagen Group as they immediately set to work and within a few months presented the first prototype of a new Bugatti at the Paris Motor Show in October '98, complete with that monstrous W18 engine that set off the idea in the first place. On the surface of it all, they followed the naming structure of Artioli's EB110, calling the new car EB118, but explained that this meant first prototype of the 18-cylinder car. And indeed it was. Only a few months later, Bugatti presented the EB218 at the Geneva Motor Show. Both these cars were front-engine luxury GTs, much in the vein of the last of the original Bugattis from the hand of Jean Bugatti. But importantly, they were not retro designs either. Giugiaro of Ital Design had reinterpreted and updated the original idea of a Bugatti saloon, and historically it all made a lot of sense. But maybe it did not marketing-wise. After another breathtakingly short period of rest between the prototypes, Bugatti changed not only the naming, but more importantly the overall concept, rather dramatically. The EB18-3 Chiron, presented at the 1999 Internationale Automobilausstellung in Frankfurt, was now mid-engined and therefore much more of a sports car, albeit with the W18 in another league to anything else seen. Ital Design was still involved in the design, but so was Volkswagen Group's own team, maybe explaining the change in design language as well. The third prototype still featured a little nod to the past. You will notice a fine little ridge all the way along the centerline of the bodywork. This is a feature that adds stability to an otherwise flat panel. But in the case of the Bugattis, it was a hint to the model that set off Piëch towards reviving Bugatti. The Type 57 SC Atlantic had such an even more pronounced ridge, and the story goes that this stems from its predecessor, the Aerolite, a one-off prototype shown in Paris in 1935. That car was said to have its bodywork built from electron, an incredibly exotic magnesium alloy that at the time could not be welded. The panels therefore had to be riveted together along the centerline, creating a unique look that was acknowledged on the prototype 70 years later, and can indeed be found on the final version of the Veyron and the Chiron. It was the fourth prototype that followed shortly after at the 1999 Tokyo Motor Show that set the template we now know. Now done in-house and looking like nothing else seen before it, the EB18-4 Veyron was fresh, elegant, sensual, modern, but at the same time clearly looking like a Bugatti. Quite an achievement that also came down well with the industry observers that had been wondering what was going on here. In this beautifully orchestrated series of show-offs, Piëch had one trump card ready, and he played it at the Geneva Motor Show in the year 2000. They were actually going to build the thing. The numbers presented were mind-boggling. 400 kilometers per hour, 1000 horsepower, and 0 to 100 in less than 3 seconds. Equally at home at the racetrack as on the autobahn, and always in full comfort. The greatest car in the world? The numbers would suggest so. But one number had changed. 18. Yes, in an ironic twist of fate, the sole idea of the magnificent 18-cylinder engine that set everything off was now deemed insufficient. Maybe you recall a number from the hand-drawn sketch of the engine. Down in the right corner, Piëch's note from 1997 said 600. Piëch's W18 was always going to be naturally aspirated. And with that in mind, 600 horsepower from 6 liters is actually more than approved. 600 horsepower would also have been world class for a luxury saloon in the late 90s. But it would not do it for an uber sports car for the 2000s and beyond. And not for the goal of 400 kilometers per hour either. So Piëch and the team resorted to a solution he had used with success before: turbocharging. In the process, they also downsized to 16 cylinders, albeit enlarging the displacement to a full 8 liters at the same time. I can't help but feel that Piëch might have been just a little bit annoyed with that one. Not least because he had sort of been in the same situation before. When Porsche back in 1971 needed more power in the Piëch masterpiece, the 12-cylinder 917 race car, they initially developed an 16-cylinder version of the car, which did indeed make a lot more power, but not as much as the later turbocharged versions of the original 12-cylinder layout, which were also more compact, better packaged and lighter, which Porsche then reverted to with great success, while the 16-cylinder engine was written off as a mistake. Speaking of mistakes, Piëch was infamous for once saying that he fired people that made the same mistake twice. Think about that for motivation. And another thing to think of: couldn't Bugatti have reached their goals with a 12-cylinder engine as well? Of course they could. 16 cylinders do in fact not represent any real advantages over a 12-cylinder. Except for one thing. Very few car manufacturers have ever built 16-cylinder engines, and no one else than Bugatti chose that route for the 2000s and haven't done since either, thereby honoring the late Ettore Bugatti's saying, "If it is comparable, it is not a Bugatti." The delay of a few years before the Veyron actually reached customers in 2005 was about the only disappointment in the story. Today we know that the Veyron succeeded in reaching both its hard goals and the status of not really being comparable to anything else. Piëch's genius was his insistence that the Veyron should have this performance and retain the usability of a real car, a classic Volkswagen trait, one might say. The road to that point was not an easy one, and the story is full of anecdotes along the way. I know I rounded off the top speed to 400 kilometers per hour, but that's because I'm not an engineer. Piëch was, and he specified, over 406 kilometers per hour. And there was, of course, a reason for that. That speed still stood as a record at Le Mans 24 hours. And it was very important to Piëch, as maybe the only person in the world, to show how his pet project had raised the bar since then. In a way, it makes no sense, as the Veyron was a road car that shouldn't really be compared to race cars anyway. But in Piëch's world, it made perfect sense. Or take the ongoing anecdote that this prestige project of Bugatti was so hugely expensive that they lost €1 million per car they sold. Really? Well, here's a thought. That loss balances out over time, as the costs for anything aftermarket for the Veyron are enormous. And maybe this is something they learned from the Volkswagen Group. Certainly the development from Veyron to Chiron in 2015 was rather similar to stepping from one generation of Golf to another. The family resemblance is still there, and also the Chiron couldn't be anything else than a Bugatti, but it just got better. I personally felt that the Bugatti story had sort of come full circle when a customer ordered a Chiron done up in the sur-mesure program as an homage to the 1935 Aerolite, and when this turned out to be one of the most beautiful new Bugattis ever. Meanwhile, the world has not stood still either, and since the Veyron, other car producers have cracked the 400 km/h barrier as well. Does these competitors also doing 400 km/h reduce the Veyron and Chiron to a bunch of impressive numbers that have been or can be bettered? No, not in my mind. Bugatti is more than anything an idea, or indeed an ideal of a car. Remember those words: if it is comparable, it is not a Bugatti. Those were the words of Ettore Bugatti himself, the man behind the birth of the original marque bearing his name. I would argue that Romano Artioli understood this and worked along the same lines when he revived the Bugatti marque with the EB110 in 1991. And that Piëch carried over that heritage with the hugely ambitious engineering goals for the Veyron. The second revival of Bugatti might or might not have been a great business case, but no doubt it's been a great adventure on many levels, and it has given us car enthusiasts two hugely spectacular cars. Piëch stepped down from the chairman's seat in 2003, the same year the first prototype of the Veyron ran. His role in reviving Bugatti as we know it today cannot be overstated. 3 years ago, Volkswagen Group sold off Bugatti to Bugatti Rimac, a joint venture between the Rimac Group and Porsche AG. And the fourth chapter has begun. Are you excited? With the majority of shares now outside of Volkswagen Group, Bugatti will have to show they can fly by themselves.